Article 6 PPD will come to order. When we think about the Pacific Northwest, we think of salmon. Salmon are vital to my home state of Oregon's history, vital to our tribes, vital to our ecosystems, vital to our economy. Unfortunately, since the middle of the 20th century, juvenile coho salmon have been dying at extraordinary rates. And in the 1990s, they were listed under the Endangered Species Act. In 2020, researchers linked some of the salmon deaths to the chemical known as 6-PPD, and we'll hear more about that from our witnesses. 6-PPD is an additive to car tires. It prevents the tires from wearing out as fast as they would otherwise. It's been used as an additive since the 1960s. Around the same time, we started noticing that coho salmon were suffering. The process for how 6-PPD gets from our tires into the waterways is straightforward. Tires wear down. They create essentially tire dust. Those little particles contain the chemical 6-PPD, and then it rains, and the rain sweeps it into the streams, and then that toxic chemical kills the salmon. When it gets into the stream, by the way, it reacts with ozone, and it's that 6-PPDQ that becomes one of the most toxic chemicals to aquatic species ever evaluated by the Environmental Protection Agency. So that's a challenge. The EPA reports, quote, concentrations of 6-PPDQ in stormwater in the Pacific Northwest were found to be lethal to coho salmon after only a few hours of exposure. And 6-PPD can be deadly to steelhead trout and deadly to other fish species as well. And it's not just marine life. These chemicals are being found in sediments and soils, dirt and dust, and even inside all of us. In one study testing 150 people, 6-PPD was found in nearly everyone. And an intriguing situation is it was found in higher concentrations in pregnant women, though I don't yet know that we have an explanation for that. 6-PPD is a disaster for the ecosystems, our economy, our tribes. So that's why it's important as we wrestle with restoring salmon or recovering salmon that we learn more about this issue. In November 2023, 15 Northwest tribal nations shared how disappearing salmon populations have affected them. They are asking us to stop using 6-PPD immediately. Sacred salmon, trout, and other fish species are unlikely to recover unless we do so. In 2023, 3 tribes from across the Pacific Northwest petitioned the Environmental Protection Agency to establish regulations prohibiting the manufacturing, processing, use, and distribution of 6-PPD in tires. Unfortunately, there's known commercially viable replacements for 6-PPD in tires. And the U.S. Tire Manufacturers Association, with us here today, has been a strong voice to say that any replacements must provide equivalent tire safety while improving environmental impacts. In fiscal year 2024, Congress invested $1 million through the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service to develop an alternative to 6-PPD. This research is being done in partnership with the company Flexsys, and we hope that it will accelerate the transition. But stopping 6-PPD's use is only one piece of the puzzle. We also need a strategy for dealing with it in our environment. It's been used, as I mentioned, on tires for more than half a century. And my home state of Oregon alone produces 4 million waste tires per year, 2/3 of which get shredded or illegally dumped. And so even when tires are recycled, and they're used in playground services, they're used for erosion or flood control, sometimes they're burned, all these things further allow 6-PPD and other chemicals to continue to contaminate ecosystems. Department of Ecology for the state of Washington is with us here today. It and others are researching strategies to address these challenges, from stormwater mitigation to source control, street sweeping, the use of filters in water infrastructure, and so forth. These are difficult questions of science, of consumer safety, of tribal rights, of species extinction, so we're thankful to have today's panel of experts to help us understand these issues. Katrina Lassiter is a program manager for the Hazardous Waste and Toxics Reduction Program at Washington State Department of Ecology. Her program identifies chemicals that pose the greatest risk to human health and the environment and finds ways to mitigate them. Also joining us is Tracy Norberg, Executive Vice President and General Counsel for the U.S. Tire Manufacturers Association. She oversees the association's environment, health, safety, and sustainability portfolio. Finally, we're joined by David Fisher, counsel for the law firm Keller and Heckman. He served as Deputy Assistant Administrator for the EPA's Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention from 2019 to 2021. Thank you all for taking the time to share your expertise with us today. And now let me turn this over to Ranking Member Mullen for any opening comments.
Thank you, Chairman Merkley, and thank you for all our witnesses for attending today's hearing. As we know, today we're here to discuss the alternatives to a chemical called 6-PPD that has been used in automotive tires since the 1960s to help them last longer. In other words, every car on the road today, regardless if it's gas-powered or electric power, has tires containing 6-PPD to protect them against oxygen exposure, which is what we call dry rot, which would otherwise cause them to quickly degrade. This protection improves passenger safety by helping to prevent car accidents from tire blowouts and other tire-related issues. This is important given that car accidents remain a leading cause of death in the U.S. Very recently, scientists have discovered that when 6-PPD-D and oxygen react, it forms a product called 6-PPD-Q that can run off into streams causing harm, specifically to fish like coho salmon. This problem is not that there is no existing replacement, the problem is there is no existing replacement to replace 6-PPD currently available, and the human health impacts of 6-PPD are still unknown. Once a science-backed replacement is found, EPA's unreasonable slow pace in approving new chemicals will further delay commercializing or a replacement substance. Congress provided clear direction to the EPA to make determination of new chemical approvals within 60 days under the Toxic Substance Control Act, and EPA consistently fails to meet their statutory deadline. Today, of the 413 new chemicals under EPA's review, only 48 have been under review for less than 90 days. That means 88% of those reviews don't meet the deadline. Here's the real problem, though. Out of those 48, what percentage at day 82 will be asked by the EPA to be paused, which is the way EPA currently is handling business? Chairman, I know you and I both have had different companies come and tell us about this. And when they pause it at day 82, it's sometimes paused for an indefinite amount of time. This backlog is completely unacceptable from both a legal and domestic manufacturing perspective. If we were to actually care about bringing a non-toxic replacement to 6-PPD to the market, we also have to care about EPA's new chemical review failures. If we don't get if we were to get a sustainable chemical replacement to the market, how long would it take to improve? How long would it take for it to actually go into effect? Today's hearing on 6-PPD shows us why fixing our new chemical program shouldn't be a bipartisan fight. It should benefit everyone, and we should start by looking at the way the EPA reviews these chemicals. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much. We're now turning to your all's testimony, and Katrina Lassiter, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Chair Merkley, Ranking Member Mullen, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. My name is Katrina Lassiter, and as the chair said, I manage the Hazardous Waste and Toxics Reduction Program at Washington State's Department of Ecology. I'm honored to be here today, and I thank you for holding this hearing. Some of this may sound redundant to Chair Merkley's opening statement. I'm honored to be here. For more than 20 years, scientists faced a mystery. Coho salmon in Washington streams and rivers were dying. The culprit was unknown, but it seemed linked to toxic chemicals running off roadways and into rivers and streams. To find the cause, researchers in Washington State spent 3 years searching through more than 2,000 chemicals that can leach from tires. In 2020, they finally found it, a chemical called 6-PPD quinone that kills coho salmon within hours of exposure. 6-PPD quinone comes from 6-PPD. 6-PPD is a chemical used in tires to prevent cracking and blowouts. It has been used for decades and is found in tires worldwide. As traffic passes on roads, tire wear particles containing 6 ppd travel through the air and stormwater runoff and enter rivers, creeks, and streams. When 6 ppd reacts with ozone, it transforms into 6 ppd quinone, also known as 6 ppdq. 6 ppdq kills salmon at such low concentrations that it is one of the most toxic chemicals to aquatic life ever identified. And I just want to repeat that for emphasis. It is one of the most toxic chemicals to aquatic life that has ever been identified. And that's why we need to be doing two things. We need to find safer alternatives to 6 ppd so we can get 6 ppd out of tires. And we need stormwater control and treatment so we can reduce 6 ppd chemicals in the environment. The need for 6 ppd alternatives and stormwater control is a national problem. Rainbow trout, steelhead, brook trout, coho salmon, and lake trout, which are found throughout the country, all die when they're exposed to 6 ppdq at concentrations that we have measured in the environment. Depleted salmon and trout populations have negative economic impacts on recreational and commercial fisheries, tourism, employment, and food supplies. And there are growing concerns about potential impacts to human health, too. We're still learning about 6 ppd and 6 ppdq, but tribes, states, and federal agencies know enough to take action now. Federal agencies, including the EPA, but also NOAA, USDOT, and USGS, are leading efforts to address 6 ppd chemicals in the environment. Tribes are taking action to protect their treaty resources and have petitioned the EPA to ban 6 ppd manufacturing and use through the Toxic Substances Control Act. And in Washington State, we're tackling this problem head-on by researching and installing stormwater solutions to protect aquatic life now. We're developing methods to monitor 6 ppd chemicals in the environment, and we're finding locations where these chemicals are causing harm. We're evaluating options for what to do with our used tires, and we're funding research to find a safer alternative for 6 ppd. In all of this, we're working with the tribes, federal and state agencies, and industry, but solving this problem does require a national and coordinated effort. And so today I ask for your support. Resource federal agencies to make progress on this work. Invest in research to advance our understanding of 6 ppd and so we can find a safer alternative. Require nationwide transportation projects to include stormwater controls for roadway runoff to protect fish now. Help us work with manufacturers to increase transparency of chemicals used in products and support legislation that reduces the use of 6 ppd because polluted waterways are not bound by state waters. I want to thank those who have turned their attention to this problem. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. And so now we'll turn to the perspective from the industry of making tires and the expertise they bring to bear. Tracy Norberg.
Good afternoon, Chairman Merkley, Ranking Member Mullen, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Tracy Norberg, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the U.S. Tire Manufacturers Association. You have my written comments, so I'll just touch on a few key points now. USTMA is the National Trade Association for tire manufacturers that produce tires in the United States. Tire manufacturing directly supports more than 291,000 U.S. jobs, and our 12 member companies and 4 affiliates account for roughly 82% of the 327 million tires shipped in the U.S. last year. 6 ppd serves an essential safety function in tires, as we've heard from both the chairman and the ranking member and my colleague from Washington Ecology, and protecting the components of the tire from attack by ozone, oxygen, and other factors are key to 6 ppd's function. Without 6 ppd, a tire's integrity would be seriously and severely, quickly compromised, jeopardizing motorist safety. 6 ppd is currently used in all tires sold in the United States, including all of our member tires available for on-road use. And we are not aware of any new motor vehicle tires available today that do not contain 6 ppd. 6-PPD quinone is not used in tire manufacturing. This material is a recently discovered transformation product of 6-PPD that may form when 6-PPD reacts with ozone or oxygen under certain conditions. Today, there are no commercially available alternatives to 6-PPD that both provide comparable safety and performance in motor vehicle tires and minimize the potential for environmental effects. Nonetheless, our industry has embraced this challenge to find a suitable alternative. In December 2020, the same month that 6-PPD quinone was first identified, USTMA requested that the California Department of Toxic Substances Control prioritize a review of 6-PPD in tires under its Safer Consumer Products regulations. To our knowledge, ours is the only industry that has ever invited this regulation upon itself. USTMA assembled a consortium of 32 tire manufacturers from across the world to identify and evaluate potential alternatives in 6-PPD in tires. In accordance with California regulations, each consortium member submitted the USTMA preliminary or Stage 1 alternatives analysis this past spring and submitted an updated report last week in response to DTSC comments. As part of the Stage 1 report, we screened more than 60 potential alternatives for their suitability to replace 6-PPD in tires, and 7 of those merited further evaluation in Stage 2 of the process that will commence shortly. By the end of this alternatives analysis process, we are optimistic that we will have identified one or more possible alternatives that hold promise to replace 6-PPD or materially reduce the level of 6-PPD in motor vehicle tires, subject, of course, to future performance testing to ensure tire safety and performance. The search for an alternative is complex, and research in this space is continually evolving. We continue to work actively, transparently, and collaboratively with a broad array of stakeholders in academia and at the state, federal, tribal, and international levels on this important work. Our collaboration with Washington Ecology extends back to 2019, actually predating the identification of 6-PPD quinone, and includes providing information on tire materials that may be found in stormwater runoff, providing technical expertise on identifying and researching tire and roadwear particles, and providing samples of cryogenically milled tire tread to support research. I hope it's clear that the industry is moving forward with great alacrity. While efforts to find and implement a suitable alternative to 6-PPD will take time, there are things that can be done now to reduce 6-PPD and 6-PPD quinone in the environment. Those measures some of them have already been mentioned, but they do include street sweeping in urban areas, choosing pavement surfaces such as rubber-modified asphalt and permeable pavement that reduce tire abrasion and mitigate stormwater impacts, installing bioretention technologies to treat stormwater, and maintaining proper tire inflation pressure to reduce tire abrasion. Research in Oregon and Washington have demonstrated the effectiveness of some of these technologies in improving stormwater quality. We welcome the opportunity to collaborate with Congress as well as regulators, affected partners, and interested stakeholders to develop policies that take advantage of technologies to help mitigate stormwater impacts associated with roadways for a more immediate positive effect on the aquatic environment. We appreciate your time and the opportunity to be here today, and we welcome the opportunity to be part of this discussion moving forward. I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and both of you have submitted longer versions of testimony, and if there's no objection, we'll submit the longer version for the record. Okay, fine. And because you're kind of amazing us up here, you're completing like exactly under the 5 minutes allocated, so really well presented. Mr. Fisher, let's turn to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Merkley, Ranking Member Mullen, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing on 6-PPD. My name is David Fisher, and I'm counsel with the law firm of Keller & Heckman, where I help clients navigate the Toxic Substances Control Act. Prior to joining Keller & Heckman, I had the great privilege of serving as a Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Office of Chemical Safety and Pollution Prevention at EPA. Today's hearing on 6-PPD, its environmental impacts, and ongoing research into potential alternatives prompts a discussion of EPA's New Chemicals Program and Section 5 of TSCA, which governs the review of new chemicals and new chemical uses. After all, a 6-PPD alternative will need to undergo substantive review by EPA's New Chemicals Division before it can be used in tires or other applications. We all know this, but it is worth repeating that nothing is possible without chemistry. But innovation in the U.S. relies on a wholly functioning and efficient new chemicals division. Under the 2016 revisions to TSCA, Congress gave clear direction to the EPA on the timeline in which to complete new chemical reviews. EPA has 90 to 180 days to render a determination regarding the new chemical substance's effect on human health and/or the environment. But until EPA makes such a determination, however long that may take, the submitter is in limbo and cannot commercially manufacture the chemical. Unfortunately, chemical reviews now take many months, if not years. If the ultimate goal is for industry to find a replacement for 6-PPD, then we should all be concerned with a potential replacement getting held up in regulatory limbo at EPA. This is why EPA needs to amend its new chemical regulations. Unfortunately, in proposing regulatory changes last year, EPA missed an opportunity for real change. EPA's final regulations to be issued later this year may yet reflect the concrete suggestions made by me and others during the public comment period. Today's hearing also prompts a closer look at the TSCA Section 21 petition process, which Earthjustice relied on in seeking a Section 6 rule to prohibit the use of 6-PPD in tires. EPA acknowledged that petitioners have the burden to show why a rule for 6-PPD is necessary, but then EPA considered other available information that it did not present in granting the petition. Moreover, EPA granted the petition and plans to initiate rulemaking this fall, even though EPA plans to collect data to inform a human health risk assessment on 6-PPD-Q and may issue Section 4 test orders to require the development of new information. The petition process as currently implemented by EPA stands in stark contrast to the Section 6 prioritization, risk evaluation, and risk management paradigm for existing chemicals. Although EPA must seek public comment for any rule issued pursuant to Section 21, EPA does not need to request either public comment or scientific peer review on a Section 21 petition itself, or on EPA's basis for granting the petition. And with respect to 6-PPD, EPA appears to have granted the petition with respect to a single condition of use, 6-PPD's use in tires. For Section 6 risk evaluations, however, EPA recently changed its regulations to mandate a whole chemical approach in which EPA reviews all conditions of use for a chemical and renders a single unreasonable risk determination for the whole chemical rather than for any condition of use. My fear is that Section 21 is fast becoming an end run around Section 6, especially at a time when EPA's refrain is a plea for more funds to implement Sections 5 and Section 6. And by granting Section 21 petitions, EPA diverts resources away from its statutory obligations under Sections 5 and 6. EPA doesn't collect fees from Section 21 petitioners, but it does collect these fees from new chemical submissions and Section 6 risk evaluations. It may be that Congress will need to further amend TSCA to address these and other ongoing challenges with TSCA implementation, but those are likely topics for future hearings. And I thank you for the opportunity and look forward to your questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Fisher. And as you were testifying, I was taken back to the extensive bipartisan discussions we had a couple years ago when we were kind of reformulating TSCA and trying to make it work more effectively. I imagine there'll be future hearings like that. It seems to be a challenging process. I wanted to begin with some questions for you, Ms. Lassiter. I'm trying to understand really the impact of this chemical. When I was growing up in Oregon, we never saw raptors. I mean, the hawks disappeared, the eagles disappeared, the osprey disappeared. I mean, I say disappeared, I never saw them. And now they're abundant. And the cause was a particular pesticide, DDT, which caused the shells of the eggs to be so weak that they'd get crushed. What is the death mechanism here? What is this chemical doing to the fish that is killing them? Is it interfering with their brain? Is it causing liver disease? What's going on?
Thank you for that question, Senator. As you know, we just in 2020 discovered that 6-PPDQ is so toxic to coho salmon and other fish. And so we are still learning. We are conducting research in Washington. We are funding research at other agencies like USGS to study fish and to figure out what's happening with them. We have a number of agencies looking into fish tissue studies to get a closer look at what's happening in the fish themselves. But we are working toward developing monitoring now.
So we, just in short, we don't really know yet.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
So are we finding that it's toxic to eggs, the fish eggs?
We don't know that yet either.
Is it toxic only to adult fish or also to the small fry?
It seems to be toxic to returning salmon. So it's pre-spawn mortality. So they're coming back in the streams to spawn, and that's when we see the mass mortality events.
And they're dying before they spawn?
Correct.
Well, that would have a big impact. So in the Washington State area where you have the streams running into ocean inlets and so forth and saltwater, are we finding that it's also killing the salmon? Because I saw a reference to the impact on the orcas. Is it also affecting the adult fish when they're still in ocean water?
We don't know that yet. What we've seen is where they're dying in mass quantities where they're coming back to spawn, and there are hot spots that we're still identifying, but often in urban streams.
So when it comes to salmon, I keep hearing the coho mentioned, but we have many types of salmon. What about other types of salmon?
So we know that there's impacts to other fish like rainbow trout, but the instant mortality, the within hours from exposure, that's specifically coho salmon. The impact isn't the same on other salmon like Chinook, which, as you know, are the primary food source for our resident orca whales.
Okay, so a lot to be learned in
Right.
terms of what is the
Yes.
mechanism that's killing them and what other fish are affected, but you do not think it's as having the same impact on Chinook.
That's right.
That's really interesting, but for another moment. Ms. Norberg, when this chemical was introduced to affect the oxygenation deterioration, I think I saw a reference somewhere to it increases the wear by about 20%. Is that accurate, or how would you characterize the extension of life of the tire?
Yeah, in general terms, it's at least, tires are lasting at least 2/3 longer than they would without 6-PPD. Before 6-PPD became widespread in its use, other waxes were used to protect the tire, and they don't protect the tire from dynamic wear and ozone exposure.
So crudely, are we talking about a tire that without 6-PPD, with 6-PPD is a 50,000-mile tire, it becomes a 30,000-mile tire?
I think it would be much more severe than that.
Well,
Yeah.
30,000 to 50,000 would be a 2/3 increase of 20,000 on top. That's why I'm trying to get a general characteristic we can just put our hands around.
Yeah, maybe the best way to say is that a tire would last a third as long, right? So
1/3 as long.
typically, yeah,
1/3
so I
as
may have misspoke, yeah. So typically, a tire now, an average lifespan of a tire is somewhere in the 40,000 mile range, and we would expect a tire to last, a third of that time on the outside.
No, it's a dramatic
Yeah, it's very
change,
dramatic.
For sure.
Yes.
And I really appreciate the cooperation of the tire industry in tackling this challenge, because not every industry says, yes, we recognize it's an issue and we want to be partners in trying to find a solution. So that's very, very helpful. So as I understand it, you presented like there were 70 chemicals or so that were being analyzed, and now it's sort of that ballpark, 60 or 70. And now 7 of those are promising. Do those 7 chemicals, do we know that they do not have the same lethal impact on trout and coho that 6-PPD has, or 6-PPD-Q?
So in the alternatives analysis that we are conducting, we have identified that understanding toxicity to coho and other salmonids is really critical to identifying an alternative. The seven materials that we've moved forward to stage 2 have met our initial screening for hazard criteria, but we have not fully evaluated all of those chemicals for sensitivity to coho and other salmonids, and that will be part of the stage 2 analysis. Not only for those 7 chemicals, but beyond that, as we get more toxicity and hazard data for other chemicals, we may be evaluating additional materials as we move forward.
So my time's expired, so I'm going to turn this over to our co-chair, and then I'll have some additional questions. Thank you.
You should call me co-chair. Did I get upgraded?
Absolutely, vice chair, any title you want, Senator.
Thank you. Well, my wife has some nicknames for me too, and they're not always good. Thank you guys once again for being here. I do appreciate your time. This is, something somewhat new to me until we started actually recognizing this hearing. I hadn't really heard this problem with the coho, even though I'm Cherokee and I meet with the tribes on a very regular basis. Obviously, it's a concern to them. Typically, what we hear about is the habitat that they're having a hard time spawning, going back upstream because of dams and infrastructure that's put in place. And that I totally understand. So this is kind of new to me. So I got some questions for you, Ms. Laster, is that right? When they're doing the test for the 699, I'm looking up my notes here. What is it?
PPDQ.
PPD2Q. Thank you. When they're doing the test on that, what was the concentration rate of it? I mean, was this tested in open streams? Was it tested in concentrated pools? And then what was the mixture rate that we were looking at?
So we've tested at concentrations that are found in the environment. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I don't know how meaningful they would be. But
Was it tested in the environment or in moving body of water, or was it a concentrated pool?
Mostly we've been testing in labs. I mean, there's been a lot of different testing happening, not just at my agency, so I can't speak to that. But we have tested in the lab at concentrations that have been found in the environment.
But not in the environment. So we haven't actually tested this in the moving water environment to see how fast it's actually diluted inside the moving water, and then what's the concentration rate per acreage of water per fish.
Okay, we have sampled for 6-PBDQ in our moving waterways, but when we're doing the tests on fish, that's happening in a laboratory environment.
And listen, I'm all about finding an alternative. I really am. But we also need to understand the impact of it too.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I think what Ms. Norburn was referring to by a third less, remember this is affected by oxygen when it interacts with it. So you can't just look at the tire based on the miles, because it's the exposure rate, it's the dry rot. It's the same thing if a car is sitting there in the environment for 4 years, 5 years, even though it's not driven, it can be a brand new tire. They'll create dry rot, which makes it not safe to drive anymore. It's the amount of time it can be exposed, and I think that's what we need to be looking at here. Because the people that are today just used to look at the tread rate on it, then you're not going to understand the dry rot, the cracking that's happening on the sidewalls, which is where the dangerous part happens. It blows out on the front axle, you have all types of issues, and then it's the effect that happens not just to the driver, but then everyone around the vehicle. And I do feel I feel very strongly we need to find the alternatives, but we also need to find the true impact of this. As the industry is looking for an alternative, we need to actually understand the science and the impacts of it too, and the cost to consumers. I mean, my Lord, we're all dealing with massive inflation rate the way that we're dealing with today, and that's I'm not making a political point, I'm just telling you that's the fact of the matter, and this would just add to it if we don't understand the cost. You know, when Congress first set this up, we had to have a reasonable impact of what it was going to be to the consumer moving forward, and all this needs to be understood. Mr. Fisher, you talked about something I was talking about with the EPA and the fact that they're not able to get these approvals done to actually make the change we need to. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in my testimony, the statute says 90 days to 180 days. I'd say on average, if you have a PMN going under review at EPA and the review concludes and there's a consent order attached to that review, we're talking up to a year and a half, maybe longer. If you then add a SNR to it, a significant new use rule that would follow that approval process, then you're adding on another probably 2 years. So it's now become sort of a multi-year endeavor versus the 90 days to 180 days that was in the statute. Even when Congress amended the statute in 2016, it didn't change those timelines. Congress still assumed EPA would meet the 90 days to 180 days. And that, as you mentioned, or was mentioned earlier today, is a rare event. Most of the time, submitters need to anticipate it taking at least a year. In fact, I advise folks, don't expect anything under a year.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think this leads to something that we should be looking at too, that maybe we need to have a hearing with the EPA to hold their feet to the fire, so to say, on getting these out. I mean, this is important for safety perspectives. This is important to the tribes. It's important to the consumer. And there's no reason why they can't do this. I know they talk about not having enough money, but my Lord, it seems like every year we're raising their budget to begin with. They're just not prioritizing it the way that Congress has asked them to do. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'll get you a new nameplate if you'd like.
Thank you.
I want to turn back to this question of the coho being affected. And you say in the laboratory, so where is this laboratory where the fish are being tested against the chemical?
We are doing those studies in Washington, I believe at the Washington Stormwater Center, so associated with WSU, and we have researchers at UW as well.
So I will follow up because I want to come see the testing, obviously, close by in Oregon, but we talk about salmon so much, and we talk about how much we're spending to move the small fry over the dams or around the dams, and all sorts of challenges. Obviously, but this issue is really a significant new addition to the discussion of the challenge we're facing. And so I'm wondering if we're seeing similar impacts, say, are being reported from Alaska or from the East Coast or from Norway or other places where there's salmon runs. Is this identification of the challenge occurred in Washington State, really a diligent observation that the fish were dying after a rainstorm and like what is going on? But are we seeing hints of this happening in other areas where there are salmon?
So certainly actually being able to see the mass mortality events has been most dramatic in Washington, but we do have researchers across the country with USGS studying this phenomena and studying it on other fish, and there is research underway in Europe as well.
And what made it so easier to detect in Washington? So is it because the streams are shorter, so the adult coho are concentrated and in an urban area where they could be easily observed as opposed to 1,000 miles up the Columbia River or so forth? Why?
That's such a good question, and that's why we're conducting research and monitoring now. We don't have those answers.
Okay. And I will really want to follow up with this question of the kill mechanism, like why it's killing, because if we don't understand why it's killing them, I mean, it must be something that's common to the rainbow trout and the coho and the brook trout, or lake. I think you mentioned lake trout. That is something different if it's not affecting the Chinook. Have we had Chinook in the laboratory in these aquariums and they're not affected?
Yeah, they've been tested in the same way.
It's really fascinating. Ms. Norberg, I wanted to turn to the question of whether the tire industry in other countries is also doing research on this.
Yeah, so we are working as a global tire industry on both this issue and then the broader issue of tire and roadwear particles. There is a global industry organization called the Tire Industry Project that is based in Switzerland. It is part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. They have been studying tire and roadwear particles for many years and continue that work. Because 6-PPD, really the issue originated here, we're at the tip of the spear when it comes to the 6-PPD specific issues, but we are coordinating as a global industry on this issue.
So is the primary research on this issue happening in Switzerland?
So broadly on tire and roadwear particles, they continue that work, yes. And then we on 6-PPD and 6-PPDQ are really in the lead here in the US, but coordinating with our global counterparts.
So the scientific research that took these many dozens of chemicals, 60, 70 chemicals, and reduced it to 7 promising, that research happened in Switzerland?
No, that research happened here in the US, and I led that project. Yeah, and it's ongoing.
Okay. So when you get down to those 7 chemicals, and the question is, do these chemicals also have an impact on fish? Are you transporting those chemicals to Ms. Lassiter's Washington State laboratories to be tested, or how are you determining the impact?
So the work that we've been doing is pursuant to the California regulatory requirements as part of the Safer Consumer Products regulations, and that regulation is a very rigorous, very prescribed process for evaluating alternatives to identify safer chemicals and products. And so the stage 1, which we've completed, is basically a screening step, and then we will continue to do more in-depth research of not only those 7 chemicals, but any others where we can garner additional research. So the ones we are moving forward don't have indications of negative impacts on salmonids or other species yet, or to date, but we'll continue that evaluation as we move forward.
So that screening process, cloakroom needs us to vote, I'm informed.
I guess so. I can make my last question quick.
So I'm going to stop, turn it over to our vice chair, co-chair, ranking member, all of the above, and then we'll adjourn the hearing. I really appreciate you all bringing your information to bear, because this situation where the high lethality of this particular chemical in regards to coho is a super big deal, and we've got to solve it. Thank you.
Thank you once again. I just real quick, Ms. Norberg, how many other things are the 6 PPD found in? Is there other products?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
What other products are 6 PPD found in, other than just tires?
I don't think I could give you the full list. I'm most familiar with tires, but other rubber products most likely contain 6
Ms.
PPD.
Lester, do you know? I'm just curious. I don't know the answer either. I'm just
What
asking.
other rubber
Oh,
products
right,
contain-
right. No, that's certainly Ms. Norberg's area of expertise.
Yeah, and I'm aware of one study in Washington State that looked at seals for water systems, but I couldn't.
I would
give the full
assume
list.
so.
We're happy to
I would
follow up.
assume they would be
Follow up.
in seals. Mr. Fisher, do you know? I think that's
Sorry, I
something we need to find out too, what other places find. My last question that I have real quick, what steps, Mr. Fisher, what steps do you recommend the EPA could do administratively to improve their timeline?
Thank you for that question. So in my written submission, I included a fairly lengthy petition for rulemaking where we basically took Part 720, which are the regulations that govern new chemical reviews, and made a lot of substantive changes. But a couple would be that sort of requiring EPA to take a much more reasonable approach when they are reviewing a new chemical submission. So for example, if they don't have data, their defaults should be reasonable. Right now, they tend to be worst-case scenarios, which are completely unrealistic, implausible, et cetera. And I think EPA needs to sort of bring that thinking back into a more reasonable area. So the concept of reasonableness, I think, should be really instilled in how EPA reviews new chemicals. There are a lot of other suggestions as well in the petition that you now have as part of the record, but another one I'd like to mention is there should be much more of of a collaborative exchange between the submitter and EPA staff. There should be an understanding of if EPA needs more data, if there are issues with the data that have been submitted, that should be conveyed to the submitter on a more timely approach or basis. Right now, it tends to, you submit and it tends to go into a bit of a black box. And I think that can both frustrate the submitter, and it also may prolong the review process if EPA could have obtained answers to its questions a lot earlier. So I really believe there should be much more of a collaborative approach to getting new chemicals reviewed and hopefully approved.
Thank you, and thank you guys for being here.
Ms. Lassiter, is it appropriate for me to say that 6-PPD is to coho as DDT was to eagles? A very short answer. Fair or unfair?
It's fair.
Thank
It
you.
is considered
Okay.
highly toxic.
Given that we're supposed to be voting, I have to run.
Thank you, Senator.
Before we adjourn, I ask unanimous consent from all the members present to submit for the record a variety of materials that include letters from stakeholders and other materials related to today's hearing. Hearing no objection, so approved. Additionally, senators will be allowed to submit questions for the record through the close of business on Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. We'll compile those questions, send them out to all of you, and we'll ask for a reply, if possible, by Wednesday, August 28th, 2024. And with that, the hearing is adjourned, and I apologize, I will not be coming down to say hello because I'm running out the door. Take care, and thank you.